بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا، وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا، إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. لله تبارك وتعالى السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Allahu Akbar. I hope everyone is doing well. I want to, before I start, to make a reminder of, let me get my phone. We are 3 days, which is March the 2nd, from our event in Newark, New Jersey. The Black Imams Roundtable will be coming to Newark, New Jersey at the Temple of Hip Hop, 55 Ludlow Street in Newark, New Jersey. Insha'Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, all of you would be able to join us who are available to join us, as we have a pre-Ramadan and an overview of the new publication and translation of the Creed of At-Tahawiyya, as we begin to have our kickoff travel for this year of 2024, going around the country and sharing with the communities some benefits, insha'Allah tabarak ta'ala. So I wanted to remind you of that, and I hope to see all of you there. But I wanted to take some time to have some comments and reflections on last night's celebration and program on the legacy and history of African American Muslims in Atlantic City. It was a beautiful event, a very, very inspiring event. And I want to thank the organizers uh, from the MSA and the various other organizations who partnered with that at Stockton University, Atlantic City campus to make that a uh, make that event possible. And it will go down in the historic record of activity in Atlantic City. And I think a lot of things uh, transpired that were extremely beneficial that I thought about. So I wanted to just touch on some of them, and uh, that they were just thoughts that in the time we had to speak, we couldn't cover them. So this is a moment just to have some thoughts. Among them is something I discovered yesterday that I didn't know. Uh, that Alhaj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, came to Atlantic City, stayed in Atlantic City in 1953 to be trained by the then minister, Minister Woodrow X, who was the minister in Atlantic City for the NOI in 1953. And he was responsible for showing Malcolm X at that time how to spread the message of the NOI and how to organize and open up temples, which I never knew that. I knew that he, meaning Minister Woodrow X, was very instrumental in opening different temples and facilitating that around the country in the early days of the NOI. But I didn't know that he was directly responsible for training Malcolm X. So that's like a little known historical fact in Atlantic City that, you know, uh, we had our part in the making of such a amazing leader and fighter of justice, for justice rather, because we hear, oftentimes you hear about leaders or famous people and you never hear about how they were made, like how they were trained, right? So that's an interesting fact. But another thing I discovered was that in those original days, and this is in the early 50s, that the first official temple that was opened in Atlantic City, which was temple number 10. So in all of the nation, Atlantic City was the 10th temple established in 1954. But their first temple was on the same block where I used to live and where I still have property. I don't live there no more, but I still have the property. And it was like interesting to me, like how life comes full circle, you know? Uh, and that area is been allocated for preservation of Atlantic City history. right? That's the area is marked out now for that. And I was like, wow, this area is a huge beginning for the Islamic movement in Atlantic City. So these like some things that I really benefited from doing that. But also, when I was thinking about the history of Masjid Muhammad of Atlantic City, because right now, alhamdulillah, Masjid Muhammad, nationally and internationally, is well known due to this platform, right? It is a place that people come from all over the world, especially all over the country, to learn, to take lessons, to sit with scholars for the programs that we put on. And it has a, still today a significance in the da'wah of Islam in this country. Alhamdulillah, there's something that we are extremely honored that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala allows us to play some role. And so I mentioned last night, and I want to talk about this because, like, when you learn history, you should learn from history what you need to do in the present to make a better future. And I want to talk about a lot of things, and I hope I don't take too much time, but most likely I am. So prepare yourself for at least 45 minutes of my thoughts because I got a lot of things I was thinking about in regard to this. In those early days of the nation of Islam in Atlantic City, in fact, in the country, especially in the mid 30s, the 40s, and the early 50s, when it reached Atlantic City, because it was here in the 40s. But in the 40s, the late 40s, they were in each other's houses having lessons and recruiting, and it was only a small group of them, right? I think at the height of their when they opened up the temple, it was only around 20 of them at that time. It wasn't a lot of people. But they had families, husband and wife, and they were committed to their work in educating their people. They were committed. And it was a mission for them. And in addition to that, they were all in their 20s in those days. In their 20s. So they were young people. When we look today, we don't see as many of our youth engaged in such a work of community building and education and economics and social activity, civil activity, political activity. But that was the time for African Americans in America where we realized that we were in a struggle. So one lesson I took from last night, that your beginning will not reflect your ending. In other words, where you start doesn't mean that's where you're going to end. So never be afraid to start wherever you may be. That's a lesson I got from that. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. the very fact that the masjid that we're in today and the work that we're doing today started with the efforts of a few individuals who at that time were trying to free themselves from an oppressive society in the United States. What they thought was Islam at that time, they tried to use that as a means to have, freedom, justice, and equality, as they used to say back in those days, right? And they worked. But I'm quite sure in that time, they didn't imagine that 70 years later, that what they were building then would become what it has become today, right? Where scholars from all over the world have visited, taught books in Masjid Muhammad. Students went abroad to learn, study, right? That they would, from that area, from their efforts, people would be learning all over the country, all over the world. People would gather, like we have the African American Islamic Summit, people coming from all over, sometimes out the country to Atlantic City, that was their origin came from their efforts. That's something to think about. Like, that's vision, right? For us, presently, to think, look where we at today and look where that started, right? And for me, when I think about it, and I think about that first temple, I drove by there last night on the way, before I went home. I drove by the area because my mind was thinking. And I was looking at the property where the original temple was, and I was like, wow, this whole thing started right here, right? Like, kind of like, whew, that's interesting. So for us, one lesson that I took from that is, even if you have to start small, start. Even if you have to start without all the necessary tools that you may need, still start. Even if you're looked at or truly are mistaken, you look like you're mistaken or you're truly mistaken, start, right? It's a real motivational piece there when you can see hindsight, you know. But now you have to have foresight. You have to see where I'm at now and where we're going to be. And for when I was thinking about this, 70 years from now. And what are we doing now to ensure what it's going to look like 70 years from now? For instance, as in our case, I'm talking about a 70-year journey. And when I look at us from that time, nation of Islam, with the creed of the nation, and this is early, 1954. And here we are today, 2024, and that Masjid Muhammad has a traditional Islamic structure, unbroken chains in the Islamic sciences back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, connections with scholars all over the Islamic world. Students studying that learned in Masjid Muhammad all over the Islamic world right now, right? We have people studying in Yemen, we have people in Saudi Arabia, we have people in Egypt, we have people in Pakistan, all who got their foundational studies of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah in Masjid Muhammad, which started with those few families in 1954 in the nation of Islam. That's some deep stuff.
One of the families still being here, the Shana family.
Yeah. And some of them are still alive to this day. That's a deep thought. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a way of, guiding people in stages. We learn in our Aqidah lessons, Allah is al-fa'alun lima yurid, the one who does whatever he wills. And he does it the way he wills it to be done. So imagine, but that's a 70-year journey. And I look now, like, especially some of this history, I knew it, but like after last night, it really, really weighed on me to think of the responsibility we have right now for the succeeding generations. Because when you look back, you see where we came from, you see where we at. Now it's your job to help facilitate where we need to go. That's our job. And it puts things in a whole different light. Especially for me as the leader in our city, right? That's a responsibility. Right now, I'm living history, right? I'm living it. But decades to come, people are going to be talking about us, about me as a leader, like we're talking about them. So the question you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do to help advance that legacy that you inherited? That's a challenge for us. And when I'm speaking of Atlantic City, but everyone can take it relative to your area, especially as African American Muslims. What legacy are you going to leave behind, and what active participation are you engaging in that's going to make that legacy, one, to be admired, right? One, to be celebrated. So we talked about the history, and I'll give you a quick rundown of what I talked about last night. So that establishment in 1954 under Minister Woodrow X, that lasts from 1954 to roughly 1970. So they started in 53, but they didn't get their number, temple number 10, until 1954. So it was like a 17-year leadership under Minister Woodrow X. And I remember the captain of the temple number 10 was Captain Alfred X, known later as Abdurrahim Hassan, right? And I remember him when I became the imam. He was older. So you remember, he's going back in the 50s. So I became the imam in 2010, really 2009, 2010. So how old he had to be? Wow. He was in his 70s, right? He was in his 70s, maybe pushing 80 at that time. And when I became now he was the captain, so he was known to be, the captain, rough, soldier, right? Him and his wife, his wife was very sick at that time, but they've been soldiering since the 50s, right? Let's recite Al-Fatiha for his soul. Captain Abdul Rahim Hassan Al-Fatiha. Yeah, he was born in 1938. So, subhanAllah, he would have been like 70 something years old at that time. MashaAllah. He before he passed, because he lived maybe the first maybe 2 years or maybe even 3 years of the community under my leadership. And he used to tell me, Imam, I know it's hard, but keep on soldiering. And I want to come back to that story, but that man had been soldiering from 1954 to his death in the early part, 2011, 12, 13, somewhere around there. I don't remember the exact date when he died. But it was, like I said, in the first 2 or 3 years of the leadership, under my leadership. But he never left my side. And I remember, because the first few years was a real struggle, just because something I'm going to discuss in the history, it happened even under my leadership. Change is very difficult for people, right? So it's always, rough waters there. But I remember him, he was in the hospital, like nursing home. And he called me, he was like, come to the nursing home, I need to talk to you. And he said, listen, I don't care what nobody say, I'm with you. He said, I know you teaching some stuff that we never heard of. But this ain't the first time I've been through that, learning new stuff. And he was on his deathbed. He said, keep teaching, brother. And don't let nobody deter you from soldiering, brother. MashaAllah. He was on his deathbed talking like that. He said, yeah, you're going to get opposition. Yeah, you're going to have people to try to, undermine your work. He said, brother, keep soldiering. Right? And he said, as long as I got a breath in my body, I'm with you and I'm going to support you. I will never forget that conversation. He was on his deathbed with that kind of energy. And I just gave you, that was from 1954. 54, he was still soldiering, right? That's something that we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give us that kind of longevity in trying to serve him subhanahu wa ta'ala and actively doing it, not just on the sidelines, but in the struggle, right? So for me, that's a big inspiration. And even when people went to him, because he was an elder, to like, oh, Imam Amin's doing, and he was such a soldier that you don't break rank. That was his mindset. You don't break rank. Oh, we don't like he's changing this. He said, follow the Imam, follow the Imam, follow the Imam. That's that nation spirit. You don't go against the leadership. Stay with the Imam, stay with the Imam. That was him. And he lived that, right? He didn't get talked about much last night because the time, but Captain Alfred, our elder Abdul Rahim Hassan, was a soldier. Soldier, right? And he lived to see all the way to where we at today. And every single change that happened, he watched it. And he was a leader as a captain. So he was a leader. So he saw the internal elements that happen in community building and nation building, because that's where they're at. And we're still in the process of nation building. Different understanding, different look, but we're still in the process of nation building. And I want you to put something up to keep that in your mind. We as a people are an independent nation. Can we put that up? We as a people are an independent nation. It's very important that we understand that. And I think that understanding is more critical today than it was even in the past. We as a people are an independent nation. And don't just say it, you have to feel it. Because an independent nation has a certain mindset and worldview. It protects itself, it pursues its interests, and it prepares its future. It protects itself, it pursues its interests, and it prepares for its future. That's what a nation does. An independent nation does that. And we have to start acting, thinking, speaking like an independent nation that we are. We've lost that concept because they used to have that nation building mindset. We've lost that collectively, not every single place, but collectively, we've lost the concept of nation building because we've integrated so much with others, but practice segregation within ourselves. That's something you should think about. We've integrated well with others, but practice too much segregation among ourselves. And for him, he was like, never do that. Don't do that. some deep stuff. Really, my mind just, because I'm in the position. So like, you're responsible. And as you get older, and these grays start coming, I ain't had no grays when I started. I actually had hair too. So two things. You lose your hair and you get gray. SubhanAllah, that's a part of nation building. But with that gray should come some understanding and a portion of wisdom. Right? So going back, now let me take you this journey that he saw. And I mentioned him because he was still soldiering 60 years later. He was still going at it, right? After it. So that was during Woodrow X term, and he was the captain during that tenure. Brother Alfred X, Captain Alfred. And one day we'll have some soldier stories about how they used to put in work, right? But that's for another time. So 17 years of leadership under Minister Woodrow X. Then that leadership was transferred to Minister Izzeddin Shabazz. His name was Donald, but he became known as Izzeddin Shabazz. And he lasts from 1971 to 1978. Now, when he became the minister, and I got stories about that. Sometimes I wish in practice we could go back to the days of the nation with the minister. One of the imams who came later, I'll tell you about it, he used to tell me, and they had a business. And back then, that was the hear and obey brothers, right? In the nation in those days, you had to hear and obey, or they put in work. So one of the elders, I'll tell you, he became an imam for a moment, but his name is Mikhail Abdul Rashid. He was an imam for 1 year in Masjid Muhammad. But him and another brother, they had some business. And it was within the nation. They were in the nation. And they said the minister, Izzeddin Shabazz, and the captain, they would roll through and just, do what they wanted to do with all the businesses. This is for the mission, brother. This is what we got to do. Hit the cash register, take their share. This is for the minister, brother. You got to take care. You got to take care of the business, brother. The nation got to be built, brother. You get your portion, but you got to be working for the nation. And one of the elders, he said, "Man, you better not say nothing." So there was no such thing as fundraising. That's how the minister fundraised. He just go to the businesses and be like, "This is what we doing, black man." Oh man. And it was a different type of environment. Hear and obey, brother. So under Izzeddin Shabazz, that lasts to 78. Now, during that time, Elijah Muhammad died in 1975, right? So there was a transition to the leadership of Imam Warathuddin Muhammad, rahimahullah, who succeeded his father in the nation. And he changed the doctrine and some of the practices that were in the nation before that, to what would have been known in that time as Orthodox Sunni Islam, right? So Izzeddin Shabazz, Minister Izzeddin Shabazz, was in that transition at that time. So that was from what they called the first resurrection to the second resurrection. So there was a lot of changes that occurred. And that was a difficult journey. And many people got lost at that moment around the country, not just in Atlantic City. But they couldn't take that transition from the NOI under Elijah Muhammad to the leadership of Imam Mufti Muhammad with the changes. So many people left the whole movement. They didn't make it. They didn't make the switch. So that ultimately happened to the leadership under Izzeddin Shabazz. And those under them, a lot of them today are no longer practicing as Sunni Muslims. They didn't make the switch, right? And I know some of them. They didn't make the switch. Because it was strange to them, right? After that, Imam Mikhail Abdul Rashid, from 1978 to 1979, he became the Imam in a period of switch between Izzeddin Shabazz and the succeeding Imam, Imam Qaidi Shakur, rahimahullah. And Imam Mikhail Abdul Rashid lived to be under me as the Imam. Actually, I did his janazah, right? And he was here at Masjid Muhammad with us, and learning and receiving the knowledge and memorizing and telling stories. He was an elderly brother. Even when he was sick, he was in it, in classes, supporting, helping in the masjid, whatever he could do, right? Working with the kids, right? The youth, soldiering, like a certain soldier. And I'm mentioning this because these guys came from the 70s and the 50s, but they continued the soldiering until their death. And that's something about Masjid Muhammad that we should take a lesson from, right? They continued the work until they died. They died in the work. I remember Imam Mikhail, like I was missing him. We hadn't seen him. He was sick. So I'm like, where's Mikhail? It's Imam Mikhail. And found out he had died in his apartment. We sent people to go check, and we found out he had died in his apartment. Rahimahullah ta'ala. Because he was a presence in the masjid. So when he wasn't there, he was like, what's going on? But then he was saying he was sick. Sometimes he wouldn't answer his phone. So he's older, so you give him a break. But he ultimately had died. But he was a soldier there, right? So he was the Imam, and he used to tell me, because he was with me, and I'm telling you, the journey of an African-American Imam in our communities is a war, literally, especially when there's a change of leadership. I don't care where you at, love your Imam. Have respect for the sacrifices that go into that position in our communities. He used to tell me when we would be talking about the struggles that we go through, he would tell me in 1978 what they were going through, what Izzeddin Shabazz went through, and the struggles that go with leadership, what Imam Qaidi Shakur went through. He said, this is a part of it. Like having your elders sometimes who have experience, and the youth should definitely take from the experience of your elders, because it makes things a lot easier when someone who's experienced something is telling you, hey, this how this go and this how you should move. Right? Because he went through, I didn't go through what he went through, but we different people. But he went through some struggles. So after that year with all those struggles, Imam Qaidi Shakur, rahimahullah, became the Imam of Masjid Muhammad in 1979. Under the leadership of Imam Warathuddin Muhammad, and he came from Philadelphia. And he was, mashallah, he was a very beautiful person. Anyone who knew him would love him. He was a beautiful individual, mashallah. And he had the job of making another transition in the structure and learning and methodology of Masjid Muhammad, which really put him in a unique position. And I never forget this. And I want to tell a story because Masjid Muhammad can serve as an example for others in other places, especially in the African American community, how to keep the community moving forward despite change, despite disagreements, separations, still keep the community going forward, still soldier, as Captain Abdurrahim Hassan used to say, still soldier. So Imam Qaidi, if you remember, the early days of the leadership of Imam Warathuddin Muhammad was a series of developments to the point that he died. It was a development. It wasn't always the same, not in doctrine, not in practice. It was developments. Does everyone understand that point? Like, because sometimes today we cling to history and leave out the part that we don't like, right? But the work of Imam Warathuddin Muhammad, rahimahullah, was a constant development to the day he died. Are y'all all aware of that? Answer that, inshallah. Constant. From stage, that's why they had many names, right? Bilalians, World Community of Islam, different names, end up the mosque cares, different transitions, right? That came with levels of understanding and learning and development. And you're talking about I don't know, 40 years almost of leadership, right? And those 40 some years or less, right? There was a lot of developments, a lot of changes, right? And Imam Qaidi was the first Imam to have to navigate all these changes. So remember, we're talking about 1979. And then during his leadership, the next year, I was a little kid and I uttered my Shahada. So that's 1980. He becomes the Imam 79. 1980, I uttered the Shahada. Now you say you're 10 years old. That's young, right? But if you grew up where I grew up, a 10-year-old was a teenager in their development and in the neighborhood. You know, at 10 years old, you know some stuff. Unfortunately. That's when you live in the projects, you grow up fast. You see a lot. So when you say 10, don't think of a normal 10-year-old. Think of an inner city in the projects 10-year-old. That's a lot different, if y'all understand what I'm saying. By the time you're 10 years old in the projects, you're getting life lessons at 10 years old. You're seeing stuff. You're doing stuff. You're in survival mode at 10 years old. Unfortunately, may Allah give our youth to be youth one day, right? And so I met him when I was like 10, 11, 80, 81, 82. And in that time, Atlantic City, prior to 1975, was really just the nation of Islam. That was what Islam was in Atlantic City. The temple number 10. When they switched the next year after that, 1975, with Izzuddin Shabazz, the Darul Islam movement was established in Atlantic City. The Darul Islam movement was based out of New York, in Brooklyn, under the leadership of Imam Yahya Abdul Karim. The Darul Islam movement. Now, I'm trying to show you something about development, about changes, about differences, and still how to navigate that. So I'm going to be explicit about things. Don't take it personal. It's just history. No matter where you stand in the history, we're just talking about the historical record. Is this clear? Because this is where we start getting sensitive. And I don't want nobody to get sensitive. We're just talking about history here, right? Are y'all following me? Because I'm going to have to now start talking, right? When we talk about the nation, it's good. Everybody can be cool. When we go into Imam Warfdi Muhammad's leadership, and then all this, the developments, we start getting sensitive, right? So right after that transition, 76, the Darul Islam movement, and there's only a few brothers, families, just like they started with the nation in 1954, 53, the Darul Islam movement was just a few families, right, in Atlantic City. And funny, they was on the same street on the other side of town, like on the eastern side of town, on the same Indiana Avenue where the nation started. That's something unique about that street. That's where the Darul Islam movement was. And they stayed there for about 3 or 4 years, according to the imam of that. His name was Imam Jabbar. We used to call him later Naib Jabbar, right? And I'll speak about that. So that Darul Islam movement Now, listen, and this is where it's going to get tight. So you have the Word of the Muhammad community at the beginning of its stages. So the doctrine is changing, but still not what we would consider today as traditional Sunni Islam, right? Did everyone follow that? I'm just giving you the historic record. Like if you look at Masjid Muhammad today, what we consider traditional Sunni Islam, at that time, that wasn't it. Even though it was called Orthodox Islam. Everyone follow me here? So the Darul Islam, why they didn't just join Imam Wafdi Muhammad community right in Atlantic City? Because they had what they considered Orthodox Islam. Yes, I'm talking 1976, right? And that Orthodox Islam, today, we would not consider that Orthodox Islam. Y'all follow? What was the Dar in that day? It was African Americans trying their best to learn the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the sources that were available for them were not organized and structured into a organized methodology of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. So what you had is a little bit of this, some knowledge from Pakistan, India, Saudi stuff, all this mixed into one, right? But a few hadith books, that was it. They didn't have a lot of access. So they were basically working with the material they had. But to them, that was more orthodox than Wafdi Muhammad community. So that's why they had their own community. Y'all follow that? Y'all following me? It's details to it, but I'm just giving you the general picture. So that was a movement. And you're going to see changes in all this stuff, but it affects Atlantic City. That's why I'm mentioning it. So now you have this. At the same time in Atlantic City, you have a few people in the mid-70s that were musicians and things like that. And a lot of them were introduced to the Ahmadiyya movement, which we call Al-Qadiani today, right? The Ahmadiyya movement out of Pakistan and India. So you had those people who were Ahmadiyya. So they didn't join Wafdi Muhammad community, which was Masjid Muhammad at that time. They didn't join the Dar. They had their own movement. But all of those were Black people. And as I was talking to one of the leaders from the Dar in those days, I was just talking to him the other day. He said to me, listen, Imam, we all pretty much got along though. We had differences in doctrine, but as Black people, we stuck together. We had good relations, something we can learn. They disagreed in doctrine. They disagreed, but in that time, Black people had a shared experience, and despite their religious or theological or doctrinal disagreements, they realized we're a nation of people and we still need to have some good relationship. That's a lesson. They had their own places, they had their own doctrines, but they cooperated in spirit with one another. That's a lesson, right? So Masjid Muhammad continues. Like I said, to 79, 78, there's the change of leadership. Imam Mikhail becomes the leader. Then in 1979, Imam Kari is sent from Philadelphia. Now, in those days, Philadelphia was the center of the Wharf D. Muhammad community on the east, on the northeast coast or the northeast region of America. So Atlantic City would basically get its leadership and instruction from Philadelphia. So Imam Khari was sent from Philadelphia to Atlantic City. And but Imam Khari was a very studious person, rahimahullah. Right? No, for the Dar, it was New York. For Atlantic City area, South Jersey, all this was Philadelphia. That's where Imam Wafdi Muhammad was actually there one time. Philadelphia was the center place. Anyway, so Imam Khari, and I remember this because I was there. When I took Shahada when the Ansar Law community first came to Atlantic City. Young people. People used to go to New York doing their hustling stuff, and they learned about the Ansars. Right? They learned about the Ansars. And then those young brothers, they happened to be from my project, they brought the Ansar doctrine to Atlantic City. And that's where the Ansars, which was out of New York too, got its momentum in Atlantic City. So now you have all these are black movements and different understandings of Islam, right? And I remember in my youth sitting, but it was only one. By the time I took Shahada, there was only one masjid, and that was Masjid Muhammad, right? So no matter what you were going to Masjid Muhammad. And I remember intense discussions with Imam Khari Shakur, rahimahullah, about the Wafdi Muhammad community, the Ansars, and we used to be going at it for hours, right? I remember those days in his office. Then, so all this is happening. The Dar left, the people from the Dar, they left, they moved to Trenton. So like 79, maybe early 80, Allahu A'lam, the exact date. So it was just the Wafdi Muhammad community, the Ahmadiyya people had left. It was the Wafdi Muhammad community and the young Ansars that were around the city, right? And that's why most of the street young people who were like in the street, most of them came to Islam through the Ansars because it was young people doing that. So most of the projects where people learned, the younger people I'm talking about, who weren't when the nation was there or early, like in the 70s, like in the early 80s, mid 80s, a lot of those young people, they came through the Ansars. It's like just a fact. People of Atlantic City know this, right? Then in the mid 80s, early 80s, mid 80s, 83, 84, 85, 86, somewhere around there, the Tabligh Jamaat came to Atlantic City. Everyone knows the Tabligh Jamaat that goes around and give, da'wah, stay in masjids, Tabligh Jamaat. Everyone knows Tabligh Jamaat. which is based out of like Pakistan and India, right? That movement came to Atlantic City in the early mid 80s. Uh, and at that time, and something unique about the Tabligh Jamaat in those days, when they used to go out in Jamaat, they used to have an alim with them, a Maulana, they would say in those days. Like the group would have a Maulana with them. And the one who came to Atlantic City was Maulana Zubair. May Allah preserve him. He's still alive, but he's very old and sick. May Allah heal him. Uh, he was the one who came to Atlantic City. Uh, and since there was no masjid except Masjid Muhammad, that's where he landed. And so all of us, that was our first experience with some level of scholarship. Why? Because Maulana Zubair, he had studied, and he was Black, African American. In the 70s, he studied 11 years in Darul Uloom in India. The original Darul Uloom in India, Deoband, he studied there for 11 years. Interesting story, his story for an African American. And so he was really a learned person. And so when he came to Atlantic City, that was our first experience with a sort of true Sunni Islamic classical type of learning. Because as you know, the Tablighs in their foundation are Maturidi, Hanafi, and Sufi. I'm talking about as a foundational methodology. I ain't talking about the details. They are Maturidi, Hanafi, Sufi. And that was him, right? So I want you to picture this. I remember it so vividly. So you got a masjid that's led by the leadership of Imam Wafdi Muhammad in those days. So we're talking about the early 80s, right? And then you have this scholar who comes with a certain level of creed. You must learn Hanafi fiqh, spirituality, so which is strange in the then Wafdi Muhammad community at that time. That's like totally strange, right? So you got a group of brothers that are learning with Maulana Zubair, and he's young at this time. So you got a group of brothers learning with Maulana Zubair, and then you got the community. So you can imagine this strict Hanafi person coming to the Wafdi Muhammad community in those days, what it looked like then. So it began to, develop into disagreements. But I remember these disagreements because they were sharp discussions about different issues, right? But I remember Maulana Zubair saying, y'all establishing the prayer, y'all have the prayer, don't divide the community. I never forget that. Because people was always trying to open up another masjid. And Maulana Zubair was having none of that. He was like, no, don't do that. Absolutely not. And he always had, even when he disagreed with Imam Khairi, he never disrespected him. And he would talk to him, but he would never oppose him, right? He would disagree and he would speak about those disagreements, but he never was like in opposition. And he wouldn't allow those who were learning from him to oppose. And I remember that vividly because I was in those sessions. I used to be there. I used to go to Fajr with Mulana Zubair in the morning. I used to study books with him and read with him. And we used to travel with him. I was young. I was the young kid, but the rest of them were older than me, but I was always around. It was interesting time when I look back, right? But none of something, and all I'm discussing, it is all Black leadership. I want you to keep that in mind. Up to the mid-'80s, the influential Muslims in Atlantic City are African Americans. Right? That's up to the mid-'80s. Then Mulana Zubair leaves. That's late 80s, 86, 87, somewhere around there. And I think it's even later than that. The Tabligh Jamaat, when he leaves, the brothers, after, for reasons, open up another masjid, which became known as the Islamic Center in those days. I don't remember the exact year. It had to be 87, 88. I don't think it was 86. It was somewhere around there, foggy on the actual year. But it was still at that time kind of under the Tabligh Jamaat. Then I remember towards the end of that time, 88, somewhere around there, the Imam that was in the Dar Islam in the 76, 77, 79, I told you about the Dar Islam that was there. He came back to Atlantic City, but he came back after the Dar Islam had split into two factions. That's when the Pakistani Sheikh Mubarak Shah Jilani, came to America with Jama'atul Fuqara, the Fuqara Jamaat. And some of the people from the Dar followed him, and some remained in the way they were before that because he was Maturidi, Hanafi, Sufi, following the Qadiriya Tariqa. So those leadership, some of the leadership of the Dar went to the Fuqara Jamaat, and some went to the Dar, which ended up being under the leadership of Imam Jamil Alameen. So that split. Imam Jabbar went with the Fuqara Jamaat, and he came back to Atlantic City at the Islamic Center and began to teach the brothers there about the Fuqara Jamaat. And when that took place, most of those brothers became of the Fuqara Jamaat. The brothers who were in the Tabligh Jamaat, they left, ended up going to Detroit. And that became a third center called the Dawah Center, right? But in all of this, these are all African Americans. And I'll stop here because I'm out of time. Uh, and I'll continue at another time when I get another time. Part two will be coming, but I have to stop. I have to go. Let me take a few questions before. So I'm stopping at like 1988, right? Uh, in Atlantic City's development. So now up to 88, the leadership from 1954 to 1988 in Atlantic City is all African American. There is no other leadership. So you're talking about 34 years of sole Black leadership in Atlantic City. African American Muslims with different changes and stages and ideas, but it's all African American leadership. That's very, very important for us to think about. But inshallah, I'll continue. I'm not saying tomorrow, I don't know. When I get the next opportunity, I'll continue with part two. Uh, let me take some quick questions, inshallah. Will steps to reestablish our nation building be the objective of the unit? Yes, most definitely. It's much bigger because we're talking national now. It's easier to do that locally than it is nationally, but it's not impossible. But we have a lot of obstacles to overcome to do that. But it's a start, right? I'm gonna be honest with you. You know the hardest part about doing that is following leadership. Right? Leadership. No matter what that leadership structure looks like, we have to figure out how to support leadership. That's our struggle. And that's why building a nation is difficult, because nation needs leaders. No leaders, it's hard to build a nation. So one of the biggest things, we have to agree on some form of leadership, whatever that structure looks like. We have to, and that's going to take time. But we start. Like I said, where you begin, it doesn't mean where you're going to end. So we have to begin. We have to start. And that's our struggle. And Allah knows best. Yes, the Dar was in Atlantic City right at the time of the transition from the nation to the leadership of Imam Mufti Imam. It was there, like it was in other places. Do you think that if the NOI had the proper belief and understanding of what Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah is, that we would be able to overcome the issues that we are dealing with now? I can't say. You know why? Because our issues are not solely religious. Our issues are also a result of being subjugated for centuries. And having a society that has diligently worked to undermine every effort we've tried to build nationhood. So we can't forget that. So just religious understanding alone is not sufficient without other things uh, being organized well. Economics, education, engagement in the society, all that stuff, right? And then how to deal with trauma. Many of us are psychologically messed up. We have real issues that we don't even realize. And I say we, like we have stuff. So all of those things are needed, not just I have the correct belief and I'm Ahl Sunnah. It's still that these are parts, but there are other elements. If your social condition is so difficult, it may overwhelm your whole religious conviction sometimes, right? So I don't know if that's that's just it. That's a part of it. And like every nation, you have many elements that a nation is faced with, not just religious elements, right? And Allah knows best. And so our community had good infrastructure set up, starting out. Many of the children descendants spoke, wrote, read, Fusa, classical, Quranic, Arabic. Are those children? I mean, they are still alive, some of them. Some of them you wouldn't even know are your Sunni teachers, right? That's where I grew up. That was my background. So that's where I first learned Arabic. That's all that stuff was there. So I mean, but as a collective, no, that thing been over. Too many changes. So most of the people who were in the Ansar days are way away from that, right? Because of all the different things they went through after that. So you won't find many of them today. Okay, I got one more question. Do you think that centralized governing bodies should be established? I just don't see uniting behind any leadership because it is Black. Enemy Elijah had a central governing body that all the temples recognize as central leadership. Oh, Elijah Muhammad. We have to have leadership. What that's going to look like, I don't know. It's very difficult. But what I believe is you're not going to get everybody. You got to have a group of people. This is how I see it in my mind. I see leadership on a local level and on a national level. And what I see is the local level has its own autonomy, but it consults because it has its representative at a national level. Among the national level, they may select a leader that consults with that national body. I think that might be the most practical way for us. One individual leader today, I don't see it, especially with all the access we have. People are just not going to follow one person. They're not going to do it. They haven't done it, and I don't see them doing it. But if we learn that we have a collective need to cooperate and we formulated a way to facilitate that, I think that would work. But I think everyone needs to feel a level or a degree of autonomy in their local communities. and cooperation at the national level. That's what I say. I'll be honest. I asked this question. You want me to be honest with you? I'm going to be honest. This is going to hurt. Wait a minute. Can you take pain before I be honest? Because I can be honest, and then people say I'm being mean, right? I'll be honest. You want me to be honest, or you want me to leave it off? What you think? Give me your thoughts. Should I be straight honest? And I'll speak for myself. And I know if someone else be honest, is a reflection of how they feel too. But I need a consensus to be honest. Khadijah, I know you're gonna say come with it because you just want some stuff, right? To be honest, I'm gonna say one thing. Number one, we don't love each other enough to follow each other. That's number one. This is me talking. We don't love each other enough to follow each other. That's number one. To me, that's the root problem. We don't love each other enough to follow each other. If we could learn to love one another, it would be easier to follow one another. That's my opinion. It's me talking, don't have to be right. I'm telling you how I feel. Right? So that's one part. Right? The second aspect that prevents, that's one. The second one is that we're not honest enough with each other to have a serious discussion on our differences, which allows us to have reasons not to love and cooperate with one another. That's number two, in my view. We're not honest about our differences. We're not honest. And what happens with that is those differences give each of us a reason why I don't have to love or cooperate with the other. Do y'all follow that second point? It's to me, it's one of the major problems. So for instance, when we come together, it's all fake. Because when we by ourselves in our groups, those differences that we didn't discuss face to face, we live upon them behind each other's back. Do you follow my point? So the unity conference, we have a unity conference, for instance, and it's all fluff. And everyone comes together, if we do that, may Allah not let us do that, and we act like we don't have these differences. We just put on a show, and everyone is attracting followers for their own stuff. So they put a fluffy show on just to each capture what they could capture among the people. That's not said. That's how it works out. I didn't say no one intended that. No one said that. But that's how it usually happens, if y'all understand that. I don't say no one intends it. I don't say no one said that. But what the result usually is that. And I'm speaking from experience, from watching us, right? I'll give you an example. And I'm trying myself not to be like that. It's hard. Trust me, it's hard. So the leaders, not the people, the leaders who are the ones pushing these ideas have to be able to sit together and have real conversation about the areas they disagree, why they disagree, understand each other, then figure out how we're going to cooperate and move forward and build each other up despite our differences. That's a challenge. But it will never occur until you can have a real discussion. Yeah, it's really that hard. People don't do it. The first thing you hear somebody say, let's not talk about what we differ. Well, that's why we can't work together, because we differ. Why would we talk about that? We should. Now, it should be a civil discourse. We should be grown adults to be able to disagree and understand each other, because that's necessary for us to produce love and cooperation. If I don't understand you and I just think you crazy and deviant and misguided, I'm never going to work with you in nothing. But if I sit down and I talk to you and I try to understand you, and I really, really try to understand you, even if I disagree, I will have a level of respect and I will know the limits and the boundaries of our cooperation. That's if I'm sincere. Do you follow my point? Running away from the elephant in the room is not going to remove it. Can we put that up? Running away from the elephant in the room is not going to remove it. I guess that's essentially what I'm saying. Running away from the elephant in the room is not going to remove it. You have to address the elephant in the room. You have to, if we're ever going to really cooperate. I didn't see your question, Nail. You got to put it back. So, for instance, I have a friend, and I'll tell you, you probably don't like it, but since we really, I believe we love each other, despite we differ, we love each other. I believe that. We say it, so I guess it got to have some truth to it. And we put up with each other, so I guess it's true, right? Imam Abu Muslima, Sheikh Abu Muslima, who's the Imam of Al Sunnah Islamic Center in East Orange, on the highway, right on the parkway, right off the parkway. If you drive on the parkway in East Orange, you'll see that big armory. That's Imam Abu Muslima's masjid. Imam Siraj put us together. And I remember when he did it, when he introduced us to each other. And as an elder, he was like, behave yourselves. Because he know him and he know me. But he put us together. I never forget it. May Allah reward him, Imam Siraj Wahaj. Because Imam Siraj Wahaj really wants us as a people to come together. That's something he realizes as an elder, that's important. And I appreciate his attempts for that, to bring us together as a people. He does. So he brings me and Abu Muslima, Sheikh Abu Muslima, together. And when we got together, the first meeting was very intense. I never forget it. It almost went south. Right? But we talked. We had like a real talk. Right? And from that day to this day, we've remained friends. And me and him be having some harsh talks. For somebody else, it might be harsh. For us, it's normal. We just go in, right? And we talk straight. There's no fake stuff with us. And we talk like two black brothers who come from a similar background, and it ain't no fake stuff. We just talk. And we be talking about all the issues that we differ about, and we go at it, and we've never stopped speaking to each other. We never stop visiting each other. He comes here, he's going to visit me. If I go there, I'm going to visit him. And we talk, and we differ. We differ. Sometimes the talk be just us differing. But inshallah, if no thing happened, he'll be at that conference. And you would say, oh, he's Salafi, or Farsi and Wahhabi. That's true. And I'm Ash'ari and Sufi. That's true. And we don't agree. But I love him. It's my man's. I pray that one day he see what we see. And I'm quite sure he says the same thing about me. It's my man. I pray that he sees what we see. But despite that, we both have one understanding, we got to help our people. We got to help our people. We got that understanding. And we're not going to let those differences that we have keep us apart, keep us from cooperating each other, keep us from loving each other, keep us from supporting. And I'm telling you, when we're doing stuff, he be the first one. How much you need, Imam? What kind of help you need? I'm down. Count me in. He's done it more than once. I respect that. And I'm the same feeling I have towards him. Right? Does that mean we don't differ? Does that mean, and you hear me going at it and he go at it too? But some things are bigger. That doesn't mean the other things are not important. But every difference doesn't mean we can't do nothing together. We can't cooperate. We can't, that's not how nations work. Right? Y'all follow what I mean? I'm just giving an example because it's something we actually do. I was just on the phone with him the other day. And if you, I don't show you, if you saw our text log, you'd be like, dang, how they still friends? How they still talk? If you saw how we be going at it. But that's brotherhood, right? We do it with non-Muslims, right? We do it. You don't divide from your brother and sister, or your uncle or your auntie. Y'all disagree. They may be Christians, right? Or not religious at all, but y'all still family and you work it out. But you ain't doing certain things with them, but you still want good for them. Well, why we can't do that as people who say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah? Because someone else told us that we got to be enemies to each other, who don't have our condition, who are not concerned with our concerns. We're going to accept that? No, absolutely not. Right? But you only can do that when you have frank conversation. We don't ignore the elephant. We have real talks. Right? We have real intense talks. But we want to do good. And we're just going to keep having intense talk till we figure out what good we can do. And I believe he sincerely wants to do good, and I sincerely want to do good. And together, that's two people who want to do. And then we'll add like Imam Siraj, and we'll add and add and add and add till we get a group of people. Though we differ, we still see a common interest for us as a people, as Muslims, as a people, and we move forward like that. That's the challenge. It's not going to happen overnight. But we got to have those tough conversations. Y'all following what I'm saying? And I just use that as an example. And if Abu Muslima don't like it, see me then. I'm joking. Right? No, I'm just messing. I'm having fun. Don't pay me no attention. Uh, this is my question. Understanding this history is imperative. How should the youth understand this history? How do we educate our immigrant brothers and sisters on this history? I think we need to do some internal work first, and then take this history to make a productive present and a prosperous future. I think that's our job. Our immigrant brothers need to see that we know how to come together ourselves before we inject them into our family disputes. They're not going to solve our problems. We're going to solve our problems. That doesn't mean we don't want to cooperate with them. But oftentimes, our dysfunction, they use for their benefits. So they'll highlight one of us and then unfairly treat the other one. But as a collective, if we learn to work together, then all of us would get treated fair. Not just the one who they can use as the poster boy, if you understand my point. Because a lot of that's going on. See my black friend, see my black imam, see my black sheikh, and he the only one you taking care of while our communities are struggling and you ain't there to help our communities. But your conscience is solved because you took care of the black sheikh or the black imam. Come on, man. Right? So we have to learn ourselves. Right? So once we do that, then we show them how history is important, but history without a present result is not that effective, right? Yeah, you telling me your glorious past, but right now we whooping you. That doesn't help. Right now, our glorious history should reflect a bright present. We have to do that work. If you understand what I'm saying, that doesn't mean we don't cooperate, we don't communicate, yes, we have to, because we got to do things simultaneously. But I think the bigger picture is that we get ourselves together. I think that's the biggest. Do y'all follow my point? Okay. So that's what we're working on. So lastly, let me put, and we're leaving the name like this. So this is just to give you, you can share it. It's a national, it's not local. It's people from all over. The Islamic Unity Conference will be July 11th through the 14th in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And the whole theme is on, the whole conference is how do we unify in all aspects of life that we need as a nation. So all areas, inshallah, will be touched on that we need to cooperate and work together. And the stages are going to be our elders first, then our leaders at the first stage. Our elders, then our leaders around the country. So our elders who are leaders are going to kick it off and lay out the direction that they see. Then the leaders are going to have their input upon that. And that will be enough to cover the whole conference for the first stages of this. Because we need leaders to work together. Because common people can want all they want, but you ain't in charge, so you can't make the decision. It's leaders who make decisions. So therefore, we need leaders that are decision makers to have their input. But the elders, because they have their experience. So that's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So Thursday, which is really probably the most important because it's the foundation of it, will be headed by Imam Siraj Wahaj, Imam Talib Abdul Rashid, Imam Zaid Shakir, Dr. Issam Bagby, and then others who will be supporting it. But these are just 4 of the elders. And why are they significant? Because they're elders, number one. All of them are 70 and above, right? So they're elders. They've been around for a long time. They've been working at this for decades. They've tried it. They've formulated organizations. All of them were leaders in manna. That shows you their effort. All of them were leaders in manna, still are through the different stages. So they've been working at this, right, as leaders. We need their guidance and their blessing. The people who don't learn from their elders, a people, a nation, who don't learn from their elders are subject to fail. I would almost say guaranteed to fail. If you don't take from the wisdom and the experience and the lessons and the knowledge of your elders, you're on your way to destruction. Even if you know some stuff they don't know, even if you have some skill sets that they didn't have, you better take that wisdom from your elders. You better listen. So it is important that we hear them first. And then take that wisdom, take that experience, take that knowledge, and apply it where it is needed for our present development and future progress. So that's where the imams come in, the various imams who are leaders of communities. And I want real leaders, people who got living, breathing communities, not just a popular speaker. Now, these are people who are actually in real leadership, responsible for people, right? There's a big difference. This ain't a solo act. This is people who got communities. They are responsible to people. Very important. And I think we'll get somewhere, inshallah. So the information is coming. You can get your plane tickets because it's locked in. Plane tickets or bus tickets or car. But the hotel part, I would say wait a week or two, sometime during Ramadan, because in July in Atlantic City, this is a tourist town, the prices are going to be out the roof, how they say. So we have special discount hotel rates, which would roughly be around $650 for all the days. at the site of the convention. So save your money for that. So soon as we release those rooms, you can book them immediately because they're going to sell out. I'm almost sure of that. So I'm telling you ahead of time to save your money to book your room, right? So that you don't have a big expense with hotels. Because right now the going rate is up to like $1,500. So if you try to do it on your own, you're talking about like $1,500 in that season. And that's now, and it's probably gonna go up. But we have some blocked. So we'll be announcing that within the next 2 weeks. We're still doing a lot of background work. But I think this will be something very important in the country. And it only takes a small group to start. Um, so I'll take one more question because I have to go. I'm sorry, I'm way over time. How do we establish real brotherhood? Be sincere. Be sincere and have fairness in your differing with others. I would say those are the keys. Be sincere and be fair when you differ with your brother or sister. Be fair. Be fair. Right? Be fair. Sometimes we're not fair. So, and listen, and understand too that we're not perfect. So we're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall short. Just like you do, so does the other. So just like you give yourself a break, give the other a break. Just like you give yourself an excuse, give the other excuse. All of these things are essential for real brotherhood. And be willing to try other people's ideas. All your ideas are not the best ideas, even if they're great. That doesn't mean someone else's idea may not be more. Even if your idea is better, it may not be the most appropriate at the moment. Even if it's a better idea, at the moment, that might not be the appropriate idea for the moment. Maybe it's for later. So you give the other the opportunity. And this is just a work in progress, and Allah knows best. All right, I hope this conversation was of some benefit. I hope you took something. I hope we have a successful conference. I hope that all of you join, you share it when the flyers come out, we spread it, and we accomplish something that furthers us. Now that we had this history lesson in one place, we can start thinking about the future and fixing the present. May Allah reward you. Barakallahu fikum wa jazakum Allahu khaira. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati ma yasifun wa salamu ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. And I remind you of this event flyer. This is the flyer for the Imams Roundtable in Newark, New Jersey, which is this Saturday at the Temple of Hip Hop at 55 Ludlow Street in Newark. We will be there having the pre-Ramadan discussion, and we will have a discussion on the new publication from the Black Imams, the Creed of At-Tahawi. We'll have a discussion on that, and good food and brotherhood and sisterhood and meeting our supporters and brothers and sisters and loved ones in Newark, New Jersey, and the surrounding areas. So, inshallah, we'll remind you of that. And please, that will be up on the website. Spread it and share it, inshallah, so as many people who wish to come would know about it. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.